So Mark, could you explain to us about rule 1 being the standing of the artist?
Yeah, I think we all have our favourite musical artists, and some avid fans would love to have photographs or fine art reproductions of a band's albums, but the fact is there are some that are really, really highly sought after, more than others. And broadly speaking, I guess you'd say the Stones, Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Debbie Harry, they're all photogenic, iconic. They mean an awful lot to an awful lot of people. And of course, when it comes to the value of photographs or album art, we're also, sadly, but that's just the way the art world works, it's also relative to talk about the mortality of either the subject or the photographer or the graphic artist, because those items obviously become more collectible after they've passed away, sad as it is. Much the same as with the subject, e.g. the musical artist, the standing of the photographer also has a big impact. You know, I've taken photographs at concerts. They may be quite good, and maybe I'm only 2 rows back and I got lucky with a really good shot. But I'm afraid my standing as a photographer is really rather low, if not non-existent. So when we're contemplating photographers such as Mick Rock, Aubrey Powell, there are so many, Susan Durgis, there are a lot of great photographers with wonderful portfolios, very famous for specific photographs or artists or moments in time. Mick Rock inescapably linked to David Bowie, Queen, Lou Reed. So the standing of the photographer is very important indeed. Yeah, I feel this is often missed. It means a great deal to me. When I look at a photograph, I like to know that the photographer, if it's a live shot for instance, I like to know that the photographer has the full permission and cooperation of the artist that he or she is photographing. So they have a privileged access. Well reflected, of course, if you take somebody like Bruce Springsteen, to have photographs of Bruce backstage, to have a photograph of Keith Richards backstage reading the newspaper, casually in Milan, privileged access. It's a really key fundamental thing, particularly with photography. If we go from one extreme to the other, so if we start off with a one-off, we've chatted about one particular print I have of Led Zeppelin's last studio album, In Through the Outdoor. It's a giant print, 1.5 metres square. To my knowledge, it's the only print of its type that's signed by both Storm Thorgerson and Aubrey Powell. It's numbered, 1 of 1. It's a beautiful print and unique. To my mind, a limited edition print really ceases to become that limited once you get past, say, 500. Having said that, Sgt. Pepper, signed by Sir Peter Blake, was an edition of 500, sold out, the most famous album cover in the world, arguably, a very famous graphic artist in Sir Peter Blake, the most famous band in the world, so a run of 500 is well justified. And I'm going to be just perhaps tacky for a moment and say that I paid barely over £1,000 for mine many years ago. I sold it for £5,000 a decade ago. Today we're talking about a print that's worth in excess of £20,000. So there are some breaks in my rules, but I don't really like to collect. I don't think I have a single item which is part of an edition of more than 500. Usually it's less than 100. So edition size matters. Yeah, signatures. It's nice to have the signature of the subject matter. So if it's a photograph of David Bowie, it's wonderful to have David's signature. If it's a photograph taken by Mick Rock, it's lovely to have Mick's signature, a hand signature. No mechanical device used, just their hand on that piece of paper is really quite special. And of course, having mentioned David Bowie, Mick Rock. Both those folks are no longer with us. I knew Mick Rock quite well, and it's sad that they're both passed, but the fact is their handwritten signatures mean all the more for the fact that they have passed away. It's lovely to have both. It's fairly unusual, certainly is in my collection, but I do draw a line. The minimum requirement is the photographer's signature. I think I've got perhaps 2 pieces where the photographer and the artist are no longer with us, and they've got an estate stamp, which is sort of the least I would expect, but I don't have many of those. So at least the photographer's signature. If you're lucky enough to get the artist's signature, the musical artist that is, that's great. So yeah, signatures really, really important. Yeah, inextricably linked, of course. Providence simply means you've got to be sure that everything is as it appears to be. So is it the photographer's signature? Did his hand, her hand, touch the paper? Is that real? Did the person have permission to take the photograph, to do the work? Does the person you're buying the print from actually own it? Just check that out. Look for evidence. Luckily, I've met a lot of people in my time. I've got really nice photographs with myself and Mick Rock and Jimmy Page, and I've got photographs with them, and I can show that to somebody that would want to buy a relative print for me. And it helps. It gives extra weight to the provenance of that piece, makes it authentic. Of course, there are written things. There are letters, emails. They're nice to have. You can look at the trail, who's owned a particular piece, and of course certificates. There can be a certificate as long as the edition number and the signature, maybe if the certificate is signed and the print is signed, do they match up? Do the numbers match up? All of those things. So yeah, provenance, really, really key thing, and it can affect the value enormously under certain circumstances, but we can go into that perhaps some other time. But provenance matters. Yeah, I guess ideally you're looking for a print that looks as if it's just come from the printers. It's spotless. It doesn't have any of the corners folded over. Having said that, if there are a couple of little marks really round the edge, most people will want to frame their print. So of course most people will then want to have some sort of border around the print. So any little mark around the outside doesn't matter that much because it'll be covered up. But certainly the image needs to be perfect. And a little tip I would give to people: if you're looking at a print before it's framed, do be careful where you stand, because as odd as it may sound, it's very easy to go and spit on a print. That does mark, and almost impossible to remove. So yeah, the condition of the print matters. It needs to be in as new condition if you can. Having said that, just to talk about framing, if you're buying a print that's already framed, it's absolutely essential that all of the component parts are archival. So that means they're non-acidic, they're printed as if they were produced by by a professional. They need to be really well done. I think we've all probably seen photographs or things behind glass where there may be tiny flies between the glass and the image. Look out for those, because once a print is framed, it really needs to be sealed to archival standards, and you need to ask that question. Yeah, again, this may be a sort of a personal requirement, but I think it's worth noting that if a print has a backstory, it just means that little bit more. The example I have, and your dad will know of this print, Rob gave me this print. It's of Richard Wright, formerly of Pink Floyd, no longer with us, but he released a studio album called Broken China, and it's the most beautiful image, but it's special, and the backstory for me is the fact that it belonged to Richard Wright, and he actually gave it to Storm Thorgerson, ironically the man that did the graphic design. But in the corner it's got a handwritten a couple of words that says "For Storm." So it's a really nice memento, and links both men, no longer with us, and I'm really proud to own that. And that's a bit of a backstory. Most of the things I collect have a backstory, and I take the time to try and find out what that backstory is. I've got a picture of, from 1972, of Ian Gillan writing "Smoke on the Water," and the shot is taken over his shoulder, but it's him handwriting the lyrics, and the song's only half written. So it's a real moment in time. So that's the backstory to that particular photograph. So yeah, backstories, really nice to have. Yeah, rule number 9 sort of breaks all the rules, and at least sets them perhaps to one side, because if an image or an item just matters to the person that owns it, then the others don't matter so much. So for me, I'm a big fan of the band UFO. I've seen them in concert probably more times than any other band, and I was given a photograph by the renowned photographer Chalky Davies. Chalky was the main photographer, New Musical Express, NME, that's easier. And Chalky is just an amazing talent, and he gave me a personalised photograph of the band UFO from 1978. And he's put full mark in the corner, which actually decreases the value, but it's something I'd never sell. It just matters to me, as does Technical Ecstasy by Black Sabbath, the first print I ever purchased. It just matters to me. So luckily that hits all the other rules too, but it wouldn't have to. It's just the first one.